Welcome to our video on New York Landlord Tenant laws. As a landlord, you need to know your responsibilities and rights to manage your rental well. To help you do that, here are some lease and landlord tenant laws you need to know in the Empire State. The lease agreement is the foundation of the landlord-tenant relationship. It's a legally binding contract between a landlord and a tenant that establishes the terms of the rental relationship. The most common type of lease agreement is a one-year, fixed-term lease that terminates at the end of the lease term. This is often referred to as a standard lease agreement. In addition to the terms of the lease, New York landlords have some additional requirements and disclosures that must be included in the lease agreement. Here's an overview of those requirements. New York landlords must provide tenants with a disclosure about whether or not the property has a sprinkler system. New York lease agreements must disclose whether or not the property has a flood history or is in a FEMA-designated floodplain. In addition, landlords must provide tenants with specific language about flood insurance. Landlords must provide all rent-stabilized tenants with an executed copy of the lease agreement within 30 days of the start of the tenancy. Pursuant to federal law, if a property was built before 1978, tenants must be provided with a lead-based paint disclosure and pamphlet.
Next, let's talk about key landlord-tenant laws in New York. Security deposits may not exceed 1 month's rent. Landlords must provide tenants with the name and location of the institution where the deposit is being held. The security deposit must be returned within 14 days of the end of the tenancy, along with an itemized list of any deductions. Landlords must provide reasonable notice when entering the property for non-emergencies. 24 hours written notice is generally considered reasonable notice. Landlords cannot charge a late fee until rent is 5 days late. The late fee cannot exceed $50 or 5% of the rent due, whichever is less. Landlords of rent-controlled apartments may not require tenants to get renters insurance, as this requires them to pay a fee in excess of the legal regulated rent. Return payment fees in New York may not exceed $20. This fee should be discussed in the lease agreement. It's important that landlords are familiar with lease termination and renewal laws. Fixed-term leases usually terminate at the end of the lease term, unless otherwise stated in the lease agreement. New York month-to-month leases require 30 days notice if a tenant has been in a unit for less than a year, 60 days if they've been in the unit for 1 to 2 years, and 90 days notice if they've lived in a unit for more than 2 years. Rent-stabilized apartments have more strict notice requirements, so it's important to check local requirements before ending a lease. New York landlords must provide tenants with written notice of any rent increases. In addition, several municipalities have rent control laws limiting the amount that landlords can raise rent. New York law requires landlords to maintain the rental property in a habitable condition. This includes ensuring that essential services like plumbing, heating, and electricity are functioning correctly. Tenants must promptly notify landlords of any necessary repairs.
Tenants in New York have specific rights, including the right to withhold rent if the landlord fails to make essential repairs within a reasonable time. Retaliation by the landlord against tenants is strictly prohibited. If a tenant fails to pay rent or violates the lease agreement, the landlord may initiate the eviction process. The process must adhere strictly to New York law, and the landlord cannot resort to self-help eviction methods, such as changing locks or shutting off utilities. Congratulations, you're now familiar with key lease laws and you're ready to create your New York lease. While these laws might sound complicated, remember that our New York lease automatically includes all required disclosures and gives you state assist tips throughout the lease building process. Our New York lease complies with all state requirements and all New York City lease laws. Before you turn over possession of your rental, make sure you've screened all tenants, have an executed New York lease agreement, and you've collected the entire security deposit and first month's rent. As you manage your rental, keep in mind that we have over 400 property management forms. These include New York-specific forms, like the sprinkler disclosure and 14-day notice. Visit easylandlordforms.com to start your tenant screening. Create a New York lease agreement that's guaranteed to comply with all New York lease laws, and access New York property management forms.